In this real side experience, I would find myself in a school of a kind. This is very often an occurrence on the real side, of new friends and those deciding to become more aware, being in a kind of schooling situation. For the real education provided by the guides on the real side is a constant, and I have found myself in various school-type settings and scenes. It generally presents as a kind of a tiered system, the aware individuals graduating through it as they assume greater awareness and recognition of the real awareness that they are. The real guides tending to assume positions as the real educators in these real side schools, which are very grand in their size, and are forever extending throughout the real side, mega UNUversal UNUversities, if you will. Although in this real side experience I was in a school situation, it was somewhat different. The UNUversal UNUversities of the real side are very much experiences pertaining to pure and unfiltered real education for each individual, and not so much then demonstrations or created situations by the guides to afford us specific viewpoints, insights and revelations for the personal self that we become more aware through. Of course, everything in creation, that which we perceive through the personal self, is created, and overall for the purpose of awareness and comparison, to recognize the is by, including the real universities and the educational references provided. As references, regardless of what they refer to, or the intent behind those that provide them, can never be the recognition of the reality they reference. But as I said, experiences in the universities of the real side will be just that, experiences of the receiving of real education by the guides. So, if we have other schooling scenarios that have, let's say, a greater spectrum of themes, imagery and subplots, this experience is more than, as the great majority are, created situations by the guides, or situations that have at one time or another been created in the simulator and are along the demonstrational viewpoints the real guides wish us to see, and so are utilized. Every viewpoint, from every conceivable position in life and body form perspective, affords us a greater richness of comparisons for the recognition of the is, as everything in creation is what the is not. And so it would be that I would find myself in a school as a student, but this would be then some kind of school from another world or dimension, for my body form was very alien in relation to a human body type, and I was of a very young age. This was one of those experiences where you have a total immersion. you are not considering how you are viewing from the perspective of an alien body type or world. More that during the experience, everything seems as normal as it would were you awake in your human body and earth life. It's as though you have been inserted into a different life position and have assumed the consciousness of the individual you are at that moment. Everything in your experience then makes sense, as you have memory access to everything that led up to that moment. These could very well be glimpses of other lifetimes, or maybe any lifetime of any individual really, as ultimately we are all this same isness awareness, operating seemingly separate personal self-consciousness vehicles through millions of simulator lifetimes. Why, on such occasions, we receive these full immersion experiences, who can say, as during such, there is no connection with the real awareness that would have us recognize objectively that we are reliving an experience or different lifetime, or recognizing that we are afforded a view from the perspective of another's life position and experience. Perhaps there are certain created lifetime experiences the real guides wish us to see from the perspective of the individual, and how its personal consciousness was at the time of it. For as much as body types and alien worlds give us additional and different perspective viewpoints, each uniquely created consciousness, if we step into it fully, must also provide us more objective comparisons. After we awake, consider what we have been shown, and compare the alien created consciousness personal view with the real awareness and the sun shining. The sun being the best being-isness demonstrational state, and as such, due to my complete immersion into the consciousness of this young alien being, I would not consider my body type, or take the moment to analyze it and recall its appearance. Standing among the other young alien students, again immersed as I was, I didn't even consider their appearances. Just like friends that we are familiar with, on the physical and the real side, we tend not to deliberate over their appearances, we just recognize who they are. There was a female instructor demonstrating all the various and exotic animal life forms of this particular planet, just like any school where an adult brings in a pet hamster to show the class as an example. She had at first a selection of very large bird-like creatures with exceptionally prominent beaks, and they seemed rather aggressive as they snapped and pecked at her. Interestingly, the demonstrator looked very human. Also, this alien school seemed to favour the presence of armed militia-type security guards, and they seemed especially brutal, because in fact these little alien students and myself were rather a dangerous species, even at a young age, and it was as though we received instruction and learnings from more human-looking teachers, as though a different species had assumed this responsibility, and the heavily armed security were also of her species, and there to assure her safety, and that of any other of these humanoid species teachers that gave us instruction. What followed next was that the same female instructor produced a whole collection of lizard-like slimy creatures, which were newborns. After a few moments, when her presentation was complete, she would instruct the security to kill all the baby lizard creatures, as I and the students were made to watch. This was quite a shock for the alien children, but it was as though it was an exercise in trauma-inducing, as though we were a dangerous species that had somehow been contained, regulated in schooling systems, which were predominantly for the purpose of instilling programs of control over us. Was this a necessity? Were we so dangerous an alien type that we had to be traumatized and programmed in such a way for our own benefit and for others? If so, I would question the methods used here, and in fact, the slimy, slaughtered lizard newborns were the very species that I and the students were, and so it seems I was having the view from the perspective of a species of reptilian that were contained and regulated by another more humanoid species. As the slaughter proceeded, I would take it upon myself, in a moment of insurrection, to grab one of the last few surviving lizard babies and run from the area we were in. Most of the other students remained where they were, programmed into acquiescence to the authority these humanoid alien suppressors represented, but a small group of the students did accompany me. We raced down the corridors, the security following, and I knew that this kind of rebellious action would carry a heavy price. Perhaps my group and I would be executed. We would eventually be met by sealed doors, for it seemed containment was so stringent that the student lizards were not allowed ever to move beyond the school they were in. Confinement was absolute. The reason why this reptilian race were considered so dangerous and demanded such controlling and programming measures was not only that as a reptilian species they were formidable as a body type, but our particular breed seemed to naturally have advanced creational, manipulation, psychic forces, ethereal abilities. And this schooling system had been created then to contain and suppress this reptilian species, and specifically these abilities, through the harsh measures, traumatizing demonstrations, and teachings implemented. And indeed, as we approached this set of sealed doors, my risk-taking rebellion, if you will, seemed to reignite my suppressed abilities, to access and harness these psychic forces, and as I ran with the others, and clutching the little lizard baby, I raised my other hand and melted the very doors that barred our progress. We spilled out into the world beyond, and the experience ended there. So, as I said, overall, an afforded view from a different species perspective, a comparison for ease recognition, and awareness of other situations going on in creation, situations of indoctrination, suppression, programming, control, and the agreements that make this a reality, the standard and typical experience of oppressors and the oppressed, a dynamic expressed with multitudes of species throughout the simulator.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it's interesting. We just had the education show before the Skype here, and these people that we listened to on a video were the Techos school from Siberia, and they're still in creation, but they have a little bit more wiggle room in terms of like how they're presenting information. They're not indoctrinating folks as much as the systems right here are to become basically one of the social masses. But it's interesting. We're all about education, really. I mean, this is the whole. We're in creation to educate ourselves to become more aware. So it's just looking at all these types of systems, alien or otherwise. It's interesting for the comparison, to see where we are and to see how we can become more aware. So thank you.